Session. I'd like to have our panelists please come on up. Our next session is going to be led by our business editor for broadcasting and cable. Everybody please welcome Jon Lafayette and his panelists. Jon?
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, as we've been hearing all day, the TV business is flooded with data. But the TV business still needs to find what's important to measure and to make sure it's being measured properly. You've got Nielsen, you've got Rentrak. They're out there trying to put together their own forms of measure, and we're all dissatisfied with what we're working with, which is C3 and C7. What we've got here is a group of people. We're all in the industry, but looking at it from different points of views. We've got buyers, we've got sellers, we've got research companies, and we're all going to take a look at what we can do better in this wonderful world of data that we have. A quick introduction of our panelists. To my far right, we've got Gabe Bevilacqua, who is Vice President of Product Management at Viacom Vantage. Next to him, not next to him, next to him. We do have next to one, most people have. Jon Curran, Director of Media Analytics at RSG Media. Next we have Howard Shimmel, who's Chief Research Officer at Turner Broadcasting. Sean Muller, who's CEO of iSpot TV. We've got George Musi, who's the Managing Partner of Analytics, Insights, and Attribution at Mindshare. Last but not least, we have Prince Wilson, who's Executive Vice President, National Television comScore. The conference is nearly over, and we've had a very full day. What I'd like to ask all of our panelists is, what's the piece of data that you guys would really like to get your hands on in order to do your jobs better than you're able to do it right now? Gabe, I'd like to start with you.
All right. Well, I will start with a modest request and say a full view on all set-top box data with the same set of filters from the total U.S. population. But something that struck me listening to the last panel, and something that we talk about a lot, is a single unified view. If we're going to talk about new audiences and new currencies and new ways of putting together an audience for an advertiser, a unified view of that across the industry.
Across the industry, meaning cable, broadcast, digital? Or?
Yes, and that can be activated and understood across different places and across different networks.
And you got to be in a position to sell all that stuff if you had that data?
I think so.
Exciting.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I represent RSG Media, and we're a data-driven solutions firm. And so what we really care about is, yes, as much data as you can get your hands on, but also focusing on what's the accepted currency in the industry and how we can really provide yield management to affect your bottom line. And what our focus is we develop these optimization tools that utilize machine learning algorithms that are literally taking in all this data, running hundreds of thousands of simulations with our predictive modeling, and also with, I'll talk about later, a little reciprocal affinity matrix that we have developed. And so what we're trying to do is we run these simulations and we produce the optimal result. And then what we say is it's within minutes, literally, and then we present them to you, the business user. We're not saying this is what you should do, we're saying this is what you could do. And then obviously, since you're the expert in the industry, you take that decision, or you take those results and do what you will with them. We're more tools, so it's whatever data you guys care about is the data that we care about.
Howard?
So I would love to know the names and addresses of all the Nielsen panelists. It's 4 o'clock. I know I'm not allowed to ask for that.
What exactly would you drop on the doorstep?
I think cars. There's so much talk today and so much talk about targeting. And, my view is that eventually it's not enough for a media company to understand if we have a lot of soda drinkers watching Conan or movie attenders watching Conan. I think we got to get to a point quickly where we not only understand the audience composition, but we also know the responsiveness of the media. We know if Conan does a good job of selling soda and maybe another show does a really good job of selling interesting cars. So, you know, what I would love to see happen is real-time, recurring, always-on audience measurement of campaign effectiveness, which would then allow me to sort of optimize not only against audience, but against response.
Yeah, so to, I guess, continue building on that, most of our clients are ad buyers, or brands and agencies. And what we find is they're very, very interested, and that's hence what we focus on, understanding the performance of their ads. So that includes a couple components. Obviously, it includes the audience that was delivered, but it also includes other things, like did people actually pay attention to the ad? Did people take a particular action? Did people buy the product? So it's really, that is probably the biggest ask from ad buyers out there, because today, content and ad measurement are kind of cobbled together. And so we see a real separation forming between those.
Sure.
I think of TV as a platform made of component parts now. So you have multiple things that define TV now. You have linear TV, the way that we used to talk about it. You have delayed viewing, you have C3, C7. Now you have a discussion about moving to 15, even C30, and beyond that. Those audiences are completely different. They should be thought about differently. You have VOD, SVOD. You have connected TVs, smart TVs. On over the top, you have streaming devices. So you have a TV discussion that is made up of many, many different things. Each one of those audiences are completely different. There's some commonalities, but they're different. So it's this kind of fundamental understanding of what that audience is, and how do I understand that audience, and therefore how do I value that audience? And then you start layering in those kind of notions of, if I want to be able to be smarter in planning, buying, activation, optimization stages, what do I need to know? So my clients come to me and I say, well, this is what I would like to give you. So I would like to give you exposure because I understand clearly what happens across those devices. I want to understand engagement, so I understand who's there, how much they're there, if there's eyeballs there, if there's eyeballs down, if they're having a conversation, if there's multiple people in the room. I want to understand perceptual shift. I want to understand behavioral impact, and ultimately I want to understand sales. So if it's understanding those audiences in the framework of impact. But TV now is very, very, very different, and it's a very compartmentalized aspect of TV. So yeah, it's a notion of understanding TV linear. That is different. But now if you move to the right, the question is, can we understand it in a way that makes it easier for us to buy it, for Howard to sell it, and ultimately somebody to fulfill it?
Georgia, is there really a difference between from device to device if the content is the same?
Yes, because it's the environment and the experience. So I choose to watch linear TV on my TV in the living room, but I can decide to watch the same live program through a Roku app, through Roku on a Time Warner app. You know, that I could be by myself in one aspect, I could be in a room with my kids and other things having a discussion. So that situational impact, which we all know kind of does have an impact, both on my attention, both on what I understand, how I understand, and what I do ultimately. So it does. But then also the way I view that content on VOD, so if I view it 3 days out versus viewing it 30 days out, my mindset is different. Right? My intent or my need could be completely different. My desire to be receptive to that message could be better 30 days out versus better the first day.
Chris?
I mean, from comScore's perspective, I think, as we move into this kind of cross-platform world, we have a lot of information. We'll continue to get more information to be able to do exactly what George was talking about, because it does require census-type measurement to understand that kind of platform-agnostic, fragmented viewing, to basically be able to project and estimate that. I think from our perspective, I think the thing that would be most important is kind of agreement on both the buy and sell side of what those advanced currency or new metrics are that define success in a campaign. Is it more business results or return on ad exposure? It isn't just about just targeted impressions. It's also about the delivery of those exposed impressions to the target audience. So it's agreement on what that kind of new world looks like on the buy and sell side to really help companies like ours define and create the services that really will be the advanced currencies of the future.
You mentioned the census approach. You saw yesterday that our friends at Nielsen are starting to adopt and have gathered some set-top box data that they're going to be using from Dish. How does that affect the competitive framework between you guys and the Nielsen folks?
So from our perspective, we're never really going to comment on what the other guys are doing. That being said, as everyone will tell you on this panel, it's easy to buy data, right? It's hard to actually do something with it, right? And at comScore, Legacy Rentrak, we spent the last 10 or 12 years creating patented systems to processing, projecting, estimating those audiences. And the real value and the real learnings are in processing that. I mean, when you think about our business, it's kind of like taking crude oil and making gasoline, right? We've built the best refinery in the business, and when it comes to processing crude oil and making gasoline. And so that's really where the magic is being able to take that information, be able to understand things like TV on and off, be able to understand titling, be able to understand all these things that are really, really hard to do, and be able to make something of value. But I do think it speaks to the fact that understanding and having census level information to deal with fragmentation today, it just validates the fact that that's necessary.
So basically you're saying good luck to them.
I always say good luck to everyone.
Now, we've got more data. Is the data perishable? I mean, a lot of advertising is bought in the upfront time period, which means we're all going to be sitting around in May and June, devising ad packages and strategies and schedules that'll run for 9 months to a year after they're bought. George, does that make sense in this new era of data to be able to buy ads in an upfront time period, and what kind of adjustments would have to be made after those initial purchases in order for that advertising to still be relevant?
Yeah, so early on in the day we had this, somebody brought up the kind of the stock market analogy. So think of the buying and selling of media as that. I think if you think about the long and short game, up to this point we've played a very long game. We've hedged our bets in buying bulk and upfront. Some clients were more risk adverse than others. But given this fragmentation, given this yet way of having a confident and kind of consistent way of tracking audiences, so we can be smarter, so we can figure out if buying a bulk is better than holding back and be more adaptive and agile in the way we're buying the business. I think you'll start seeing some of those trade-offs be made. I think some of all the broadcasters are going to hedge their bets in the way they present audiences across all their properties. I think they'll do that. How they expose that will be interesting. If they expose that into a buy this package because we can give you better pricing, better efficiencies, better effectiveness, or we're going to open this up on a rolling basis so you can make a decision in the environment that is the most up-to-date information. I think we'll still have people make commitments, because I think that's just a value of the money that they can buy, and they want to make sure that they have enough of that in the environments that they want. But I think you'll see a lot more of this short game. So I'm willing to be able to understand the environments and be able to make that call as best as I can, given all this data that I have. And all that data is going to be a combination of people like Rentrak and people like Nielsen and the broadcasters and the other third-party exchanges, where you have where you ultimately can have, and the agencies are going to be responsible to I'll take Chris's comment, to make the best oil possible. I think we'll have some of it, but I think the secret sauce is also going to be the component that we will bring to the table. But I think you'll still have a you'll still have a long game, if you want to call the upfront a long game, but I think you'll still have this notion of people going in there maybe a little more pre-wired about the short game, And in the upfront, I think everybody's going to be there to be convinced that they should still be thinking about the long game.
Howard and Gabe, you guys are on the media sales side. How can people buy based on data in the upfront, and do you have facilities for being able to adjust and optimize as time goes by and the data that this stuff is based on changes?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. I think part of what I think the industry is going to need to get to is, I think we're always going to be optimizing and thinking about allocation, and as we're trying to put the best, find the best spot against the audience that one of George's advertisers wants to buy against, we're obviously going to have much more certainty of where those places are on our inventory closer into the schedule running. We're living in a world where there's obviously rapid amounts of change. So I think part of what we need to do is think about how we get the allocation right in the upfront, but then as we're, have almost a pre-flighting stage where we could be that much more certain about our estimates, optimize, and then potentially think about re-optimizing within flight.
Yeah, this will be our third year with Vantage, thinking about targeting, and I think there's a couple angles to thinking about that long-term planning. One is, how is the data going to evolve over the course of the year? And the reality is the data sources and the way we're building a target segment, that evolves over the course of the year, and you need to make sure you have the pipes built to accommodate that. But who's in the target is different in June versus December. But also, the way we look at it is we're doing optimizations every 2 weeks with Vantage. So it is very difficult to know 6 months in advance exactly where this audience is going to be. But at the same time, by year 3, you realize you need to have a broader sense, a simulation of possible outcomes, and the confidence that you're going to deliver against, the advertiser's goal with the right segment when the time is right for that marketer to deliver the campaign.
So how do you balance off the need to re-optimize with the predictive algorithms that you guys also have as part of these machines? I mean, are you able to predict, or do you have to re-optimize? What's the balance there?
Yeah, so we're able, when we run our estimates now for our targeting deals using our algorithm, competitive audience estimating, we are really happy with the predictability of those estimates. Now, what we'd be doing is today looking at a campaign maybe that's going to run in May, June, July based on the most current data we have against the audience. So I think the precision, again, I think the issue we're dealing with is the closer in you are, I think we could all predict the Yankees are going to win the World Series today. Probably couldn't have predicted it before spring training. And probably will be able to predict better in September. So it's just a matter of timing more than it is, I think, the algorithm getting smarter.
Yeah, and I think the marketer understands that. I think, again, we've come to understand that. And I think it's a part of the products and the offerings maturing.
Yeah, but the algorithm really needs to, and this is what with our algorithms, I'm sure yours as well. It needs to learn from its mistakes, and it needs to learn from its successes. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we are doing with predictive analytics is we're looking at seasonality. So that's like a year ago today or a year ago this month. How that's doing. Then we're mixing that what that looked like with the last 13 weeks to give yourself an overall high-level view of what's going on right now, and then the last 4 weeks to give yourself trends. So now you can say that when you're, like for us, when we're re-optimizing these marketing campaigns like what we're doing with Viacom, we're looking at what the current performance is and then taking that information and then making decisions moving forward with the results that we just received. So, and when you're talking about making predictions far in advance, like months in advance, you obviously don't know exactly what the programming is going to be. I mean, you know what your new shows are going to be and all this stuff that's supposed to be there, but for the whole day, for the rotation of the day, you're not necessarily sure. But as things start to firm up, that's where reciprocal affinity comes into play. So if you have, like what we developed and also with Viacom, like you develop a reciprocal affinity matrix for the show that you are promoting, and all of the shows that people who watch that show are also watching. So you rank them for every single program that's on your network, every program that's on your sister networks, and every program that's off channel. So that gives you the ability, that's behavioral targeting, that's essentially what it is. That gives you the ability to then now I understand where I should be based on what the predictive analytics said with people 18 to 49, where they're going to be today on my network. But now that I know what programs are going to be there, or the people that I'm actually, for the show I'm trying to promote, I know now what they're watching. So in that 3-hour block that this optimizer said I should be planning to put 3 spots in these 3 hours, well, I now know exactly where to place them because my affinity matrix told me that these 2 shows here ranked highest over this show. Because not all GRPs are created equal. You can get 1 million views, you can get 1 million impressions or 1,000 impressions from 2 different shows. But you want to hit the show that you can increase the probability of converting the person that actually watch your show. And I think that goes with advertisers as well. If you have 2 different shows, if you're selling Toyota, you want to make sure that you're hitting the person that's watching a show that Toyota, like people that are in the market for Toyota are watching at that point.
So yeah, from a buying point of view,
it's a measure of time, right? So the first one is different than the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth time. So it's a play of that reach and frequency capability. It's also a play of recency. It's a play of context, and it's a play of intent and mindset. So there's a lot of and situation ultimately. But I think to go back to the upfront a bit, I think people will commit. So let's say we come in and commit, $2 billion to the upfront. Where I think some of the comments that were made will be, if I get week 1, week 2 into my campaign after post upfront, and I'm seeing that the delivery is under 30%, that's where I think the flexibility has to play in, where the algorithms have to. I think then it becomes a combination of technology, agency, and broadcasters, where the algorithms have to reallocate that money, take into account, right, the outcome that I'm trying to do against the audience that I'm ultimately trying to engage, but ultimately take into account all these other things, right? So I reached this person already, but I'm not going to be able to fulfill it. And then I have to think about the frequency. So if I have to move away from this program, which I bought in the upfront, I have to go to a different program, which I may not necessarily have purchased, but somebody identified it as a capable and probable way of doing business, then when is the right time for me to expose my message? Because it might not be frequency 2, it might be frequency 7. Right. So I think there's a lot of intricacies if we move into a more dynamic. So we'll still buy in the upfront. The question is, what happens if the delivery is not there? Then this dynamic nature of doing business will have to take over because that's the only way that I can be able to, reach the people that I need at the level of magnitude that I need them, but ultimately have to take into account the message, the frequency, the recency, the mindset, the intent, the situation, all those things. Now, obviously, I can do that, but it's not going to be as real time and as impactful if somebody that has or multiple algorithms that can be able to hedge my bet against the likelihood that I'm going to reach that person in that situation.
Sean, you talked about Hi, Sean. You talked a little bit about the coupling of the advertising from the programming that surrounds it. How does context figure into the ad impression mathematics?
Well, it's really important. But first of all, everything we've talked about so far is planning for the buy, right? So you have to understand your audience. You have to predict what audience you're going to have. You have to predict whether they're in the market they're an auto intender. But then comes the actual placement of the ad and the actual delivery of the ad. And that's where the waters get a little bit muddy, right? Because you take a single program, everybody buys the same audience, but everybody gets a completely different audience, right? Up to 35% variation, depending on the type of programming that it is. So now it's really important to first, understand the actual audience. You know what you bought, but it's really important to understand what you got. And then it's also really important to understand the context of how your ad performed in that program, in that pod position, that pod placement. So in other words, let's take NBA games for example. So if you look at NBA games in the last 2 months, the third quarter is going to, on average, going to get you the highest audience. And that's fairly consistent. So you want to be in the third quarter, and you want to be as close to the beginning of the pod as possible, because the view rates start dropping as you go further and further into the pod. You may also want to know that travel website ads actually tend to perform really well during NBA games, in particular pod position. So that is the type, so if you're a brand and advertiser, it goes much, much further than beyond just this planning piece of where are these audiences at. It's critical. You got to know where the audiences are at, otherwise you're throwing darts with a blindfold. But it doesn't stop there. In fact, it only starts there. So that's where the program context, and also you're talking about frequency, because what happens to your view rate as you're getting more and more frequency? What happens to the engagement of that? So these are all important decisions. Now, of course, it gets more complex is the downside, but as TV continues to fragment and there's more and more channel changing and more on demand and fast forwarding, you sort of have to kind of move towards that type of model. It's inevitable.
I mean, the one thing I'll add to that, so I agree with Sean, I mean, but I think that it isn't just about exposure to TV ads, right? It's also about exposure to the digital ads in conjunction with the TV ads. So it is cross-platform exposure, right? Because we're in a world today where ad exposure is ad exposure. So when you're talking about the result or how well the campaign worked, it's like who saw the ad, on what platform, and more importantly, did that exposure drive result? So at the end of the day, this is going to be more about exposure to those ads, and then did we see a measurable difference in that advertiser's business, right? Versus did I just get impressions or did I get my GRPs? I mean, that's where all this is going to go, right? And it's really critical to be able to have that kind of ability to understand ad exposure, duplication cross-platform at different frequency levels, because you're going to see different conversion levels at different frequency. Right, so you're going to see a conversion. Someone exposed to an ad 5 times is going to convert this at level X, and 6 times you may see no incremental increase, but you see huge increase from 2, 3, and 4. So it's about taking that, it's about extending the reach and being able to take that overexposed audience and redeploying, even if you have to pay a premium, to be able to bring that lower frequency up into that band that's going to perform the best. So ultimately, all this comes down to, did the ads convert to business result? And that's kind of why I think when you look at these advanced currencies and you look at kind of where the world's going, it's going to be a lot of new metrics that are going to drive the value of cross-platform and advertising for video in general.
But one of the things I think we want to be really precise around is that the ideal system, and whether you guys build it or Nielsen builds it or someone else builds it, has to allow us to put in a plan, understand cross-platform reach and interaction, and be predictive about a return for an advertiser, right? One of the things I think we lose, maybe as an industry we've been a little slow about, is building responsiveness into our core metrics. Because at the end of the day, we want to make things work on behalf of your advertisers. That's what we're in business to do. But if we don't have the complete view, and we really can't, have different dials that you modulate and predict an advertiser's outcome, sales per dollar spent in media, we have to get there. We did a study with TRA, with A&E, where we actually looked at a bunch of advertisers who had dramatically reduced their TV spend, and those advertisers lost $3 in sales for every dollar they cut their TV back. If advertisers would have better planning system, they might understand sort of the risk of doing that. So it's all got to be cross-platform response-based.
Yeah, so Howard brings up a good point that there's always this understanding that there is an impact in media, and specifically we know TV does many things, and one of the best things that it does is it creates massive demand in the market. And then digital should do ultimately a great job of capturing that demand in whatever form or fashion that it needs to. The one thing that we're starting to, a lot of the marketing consultancy companies and marketing consultancy companies that are out there, and some of the management consulting companies, and comScore and Nielsen, that are trying to do, and agencies are trying to do it as well, is to ultimately try to identify, one, what this total value of direct and indirect relationships that happen with all media. TV is probably the one that is the most powerful, yet the one that is the less understood of all media that says that if I have TV on, what's the value that it provides, one, directly to sales, and two, indirectly to all the 75 different channels that it helps elevate. And then, you know, when you have TV to search, there's a value there. Because of TV to search, search provides amplification to social. Because of that, social goes to site, and site delivers on the outcome. So there's a massive relationship there. Some of the metrics that are ultimately we're going to need in TV that we're starting to kind of play into the space a little bit from measuring companies and some of the maybe the newer players in the market is to fundamentally understand some of the granularities of the metrics. You know, how much audience did it really get? How many people were in the room? How many people eyeballs were actually paying attention? What behavior did they do because the ad was in pod 1, position 1, and that reach of that audience was this much versus when an ad ran again in that same program at a different position. And I think that when you put that information into this relationship, these advanced analytics should hopefully give you a fundamental understanding of the value of TV because you have this fundamental understanding of the component parts of that TV.
Obviously, from a programmer's point of view, you're spending different amounts of money for different types of programming. You've got acquired programming, you've got original programming. Are we at a point where we can figure out whether or not the expense that the programmer pays for original programming makes it worth buying from an advertising point of view? Is there a multiplier in being the original programmer?
Yeah, so it gets back to the conversation we were having before about context. And you know, one of the things I think also the industry hasn't done a really good job of is measuring engaged audience. So think about people who were watching the last 10 minutes of last night's game. That was a highly engaged audience. I would argue that advertisers who had the ability to be around that got a better return than if they were running, you know, ROS, you know, on some other cable network or broadcast network. I think the challenge
is their data.
Sorry?
You can argue that, but is there data?
Well, I think that's right. I think as an industry, especially with all of the talk around programmatic, it's really incumbent on us to do a better job of really understanding, you know, whether it's engagement or some other metric that measures context. You know, being able to understand what the multiplier is, if you're there versus if you're somewhere else. We haven't tackled that as well as an industry as I think we need to now.
Yeah, and I think in terms of engagement, what are one of the critical measures on the digital video side for engagement? Right? People look at view rates. Do people actually watch through that, or do they get distracted and move off the page or do something else? So that measurement is there's technology is there today. That measurement is available for television today. In fact, we see television as a device that's just a digital player. That's really, it's no different. And so those types of measurements are now available to see. And I'll bet if we pulled up the last spot in last night's championship game, you would see very high view rates on all the ads that ran to Howard's point. So those metrics are finally there.
Does content one of the inputs that goes into the Vantage calculations in terms of where advertisers wind up and how much the spots are worth?
Yeah, so this is something we're looking at closely. I would say, you know, the discipline that I think a lot of us come at targeting with, it just is the heritage of digital, where we've got a list of cookies, we're gonna find them anywhere, and it doesn't really matter where they sit. And when you start to look at the data, and we've done some exploration around this, it turns out that context matters a lot. And that's part of the promise of television, is that it is a different experience. And you know, not every cookie and every web page is created equal. Well, certainly not compared to the experience of premium television and premium video. So absolutely something that we've been exploring, we'll continue to explore, and something we're very interested in is matching not just the audience definition, but how does the audience definition then map to a specific context, whether it's the creative, whether it's the network, etc. There's a couple of different ways you can cut it.
And I just want to say, you know, looking forward, it seems like, well, obviously we all know that the currency right now is C3, but with the exciting things that you're doing with Vantage and what you're doing with Audience Now and all the other products that you're offering, NBC with ATP and Discovery just, you know, recently announced Engage. I mean, all these things are really exciting. It seems like behavioral targeting is the future, and what you're also doing at comScore and Rentrak, and the analytics you're doing over at Mindshare, it's when do we feel that we are going to get consensus on this data, on what it actually means, like molding your first-party data with third-party data to actually really tell the story that a buyer, like a friend of mine who runs one of the large accounts actually at your agency, said to me, he's like, but what does it all mean, like for instance, for Audience Now and for Vantage? Like, what does that mean? What do I tell my, like if they're telling me that they promised me this and then they're telling me that they delivered it, I believe it. And I explained to him, no, it's real. But he needs to explain and he needs to verify it to a third party for his clients. So how do you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say, right, so we support a lot of the platforms that you mentioned. I'm not going to get into all the details, but we do a lot of that kind of work. The one thing that I hear, and I'd love to hear George's take on it, from a lot of the holding companies is, this is all great, but how do I rationalize this, right? So how do I know that what I get from Howard is the same as what I'm getting from Gabe? How do I know the targets are consistent? I mean, and so one of the things that I hear a lot is, hey, this is going to be about creating a tech stack that everyone can kind of access through some sort of API, so that the company, so that the sell side is competing more on their results, their secret sauce, their content. I mean, it kind of goes back to the old way of where you always competed, but really, instead of just delivering impressions or GRPs, it's about how am I smarter from an optimization standpoint? How does my content have better affinity with the advertiser so the result is there, therefore it's more value, and you add this element of quality of audience to just reach, right? And that's really what it comes down to, because if you're dealing with 25-54 age sex, you're commoditizing the inventory because all 25-54-year-olds are created equal, right? Which isn't the case. And what this kind of advanced currency approach, and one of the things that we see is a role that comScore will play is really kind of this objective third-party kind of tech stack or information asset that people can tap into to be able to answer these questions and know that this targeted impression here is calculated in the same way as this one over here. So you can start to look at optimization across portfolio. I don't know, George, what you're...
Yeah, so, I mean, think of broadcasters and broadcasters and publishers are the same, you guys have the same environment Howard now, so it's, they're looking at audiences across their entire ecosystem. When we have conversations with Howard and his team or NBC, we care about depth. So nobody understands their audiences better than they do. But I can't take what Howard tells me and put that into play into the entire ecosystem, nor should I, because it's a different environment. When we have conversations with comScore or Nielsen, it's about breadth. So I want a consistent way of understanding these things. I don't expect at some point I would hope that we get to a level where there's a fair ground between the depth of Howard and the breadth of comScore, that we get to a place that we have a fundamental understanding of that these audiences are the true valuable audience for me, just beyond a simple age and gender, just beyond a simple currency, where I actually can understand the true impact of that. But I never would expect that Nielsen or comScore to be able to do what Howard or NBC does, nor am I ever going to take what Howard tells me as face value for everything that I'm going to do in the market. Right? So that's the different notions where I think everybody plays in that. We expect a common, I think every agency will say that, we expect a common framework of breadth. So I need to step back, understand the entire ecosystem, understand the potential I can get across my audience for my brand. When I have a conversation about what I need Turner for, what I need NBC for, they're going to come at it from different angles. They might use the same data sets, but they're going to look at it, right? And they're going to put their secret sauce on it, and they're going to manifest that in a way that they believe shows the full value of their audience, which might be or might not be the same thing that NBC does, or CBS does, or CW does, right? And that, if I just rely on that, it's going to be extremely difficult for me to go back to my client and say, here's the plan for you. I need to balance that with the breadth of a third-party measurement company that tells me an opportunity of I can only get 200 million people across all these devices. So then when I can reconcile those two, and then I buy, I need somebody to also, a third party, objectively tell me the delivery of that and ultimately tell me the impact of that.
It might be that the role of Chris's company and Nielsen and others is, counting available audience against audience targets is a pretty straightforward process, right? I mean, we got to agree on, is it Catalina, is it Shopcom, is it set-top box data, is it panel data? And that should be sort of an open book that the whole industry gets to play off of. I think if I'm doing my job as running research at Turner, what I've been able to do is measure lots of campaigns so I know from a response basis, because I've measured Coke and Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and whatever other carbonated cola pepper. And I know responsiveness based on measuring a lot of campaigns. And it's a matter of the discussion entering that in along with sort of the common book currency measure that I think gets to a place we need to be.
Yeah, because I mean that's the only way that you can have one, scale to Chris's point, and two is for us to be able to have the right, have all the information to have an informed discussion with each one of these players, as well as more importantly our clients, to say this is what we feel is the right mix, because ultimately what you're doing is you're mixing devices, platforms, screens, yes, but you're also mixing publishers. Right, just there's many different mixes into this equation, right? So I need to identify what the right mix is within Turner and within Turner, right? And then NBC and Turner, and then NBC within NBC, right? And then NBC platform, primary NBC ancillary. So there's a lot of different mixes in this, right? So that's why having all this breadth of information gives us an informed view about their ecosystem. But then having the breadth of information gives us the right enough of information to step back and look at it and say, I think there's a better way of doing this.
Well, and then you find yourself in a situation where you're optimizing the optimized plans, right? Like on the buy side, right? It's like, here's what I'm getting from audience now from Turner, here's what I'm getting from Vantage, here's what I'm getting from ATP, and how do all those things work together? And that's going to be the responsibility of the agency to figure out how all those components.
Yeah, because ultimately, remember, although I'm buying different properties, the goal of what they're doing is the same. So I'm still trying to sell a product, right? And their job is to show me how much of their entity is helping me drive that product. My goal is to go back to my brand and tell me, I gave you a plan, here's how the plans are looking. What they're going to tell me, what Howard's going to tell me from his research is going to be a part of my ability to go back, and what Chris is going to tell me, what Nielsen's going to tell me, my ability, those are component parts to us to go back. Now, I mean, the smart person will say, well, each use what Howard or NBC or CBS or anybody else is giving you as a way to understand, because the common denominator is there. So the question is, how much do I understand and believe that Howard is 50% accurate, 70% accurate, NBC is 60, 70% accurate, and then how do I use those cross-pollination of learnings to go back and re-optimize my plan? Because if I optimize in Turner, it's going to have an impact on, believe me, if I just optimize Turner and not optimize anything else, it will impact everything else.
Terrific. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. It's been a terrific discussion. I'd like to thank our panelists for their thoughts and